Imagine for a moment the silence that settles when the last door of your child's room closes behind them. There are no more toys scattered on the floor, nor the cheerful sound of laughter that once filled the house. What remains is an almost physical absence, a sense of emptiness that tightens the chest and makes time feel heavier. Many parents at this moment feel a silent anguish, yet few voices prepare them for this invisible transition. Sigmund Freud, a master at unveiling the deepest layers of the human psyche, taught us that the pain of separation does not arise from the departure of the other, but from the collapse of the role that once gave meaning to our existential purpose. You dedicated years, perhaps decades, to being the pillar, the guide, the guardian. Every gesture was an extension of the sacred mission to protect, guide, and love. But what do you do when that role seems to have quietly expired, without warning, without a manual, without a clear rite of passage? No one told you that as your children grow, you will be summoned to undergo a brutal emotional metamorphosis, from indispensable protagonist to silent spectator. Freud would describe this process as object loss, where the self you once knew must die so that a new one may emerge if you have the courage to cross this painful threshold. Perhaps you find yourself there, lost in confused thoughts, wavering between pride at your child's independence and a sadness you dare not confess to anyone. And it is exactly here that the Freudian dilemma arises, the unconscious desire to keep the other dependent in order to preserve your own identity. Psychoanalysis warns us of this intrinsic conflict, often disguised as concern, but which hides the visceral fear of losing the central place in another's life. You find yourself caught between genuine love and the wounded ego that silently whispers, "And now who am I?" It is at this crossroads that the greatest psychological challenge of mature parenthood arises, to accept the pain of separation as the ultimate act of love. For Freud, allowing the other to go even when your soul cries out to hold on is the highest form of overcoming parental narcissism. The true test is not in raising a dependent child, but in preparing to be left behind with dignity, serenity, and understanding. The suffering you feel, as devastating as it may seem, is the sign that your mission was successful. Yet few know how to handle this silent victory. Now I invite you to embark on this reflective journey. In this video, we will explore together, through the profound lens of Freudian psychoanalysis, how you can reframe your role, rebuild your identity, and find meaning in a new chapter of life. Because the liberating and often painful truth is that the love that lets go is the only love that truly endures. When children grow up and follow their own paths, many parents find themselves facing a shattered mirror, where the reflection no longer corresponds to the image that once sustained their identity. Freud teaches us that parental love is, to a large extent, a narcissistic investment. Parents see in their children the continuation of themselves, placing in them their unfulfilled dreams, desires, and expectations. Thus, when children become independent, that mirror shatters, leaving parents confronted with fragments of themselves that must be reorganized. This reorganization is not simple. The ego, confronted with the loss of the object of libidinal investment, enters a mourning process. Freud describes mourning as the withdrawal of libido from the lost object, followed by its reintegration into the ego. In the case of parents, the lost object is the role of indispensable caregiver. The pain felt is not only for the physical absence of the children, but also for the need to rebuild an identity no longer dependent on that function. In this process, it is common for ambivalent feelings to arise: pride in the children's autonomy and resentment at no longer being the center of their lives. Freud would point to this ambivalence as a manifestation of the conflict between the ID, which desires to maintain the pleasure of the symbiotic relationship, and the superego, which recognizes the necessity of separation for the healthy development of both. This internal tension can generate anxiety and feelings of inadequacy. The solution proposed by Freud involves sublimation, a defense mechanism that allows the redirection of libidinal energy into new, socially accepted and gratifying activities. For parents, this may mean investing in personal projects, rediscovering forgotten interests, or establishing new forms of relationships with their children based on mutual respect and autonomy. This transition requires courage and a willingness to face the unknown. It is important to recognize that this process is not linear. There will be moments of regression, where the desire to return to the previous role will be strong. Freud reminds us that the unconscious does not follow the temporal logic of the conscious mind. Thus, it is natural for old emotions to resurface. The challenge lies in acknowledging these feelings without being dominated by them, using the acquired awareness to move forward. By accepting change and allowing themselves to grow with it, parents can discover a new form of love, less possessive, more free and mature. Freud believed that true love involves the ability to wish for the well-being of the other, even if it means relinquishing certain personal satisfactions. In this new stage, parental love transforms into a force that supports, inspires, and respects the individuality of the children. The transition from the role of caregiver to that of observer in the lives of children can be compared to a labyrinth, where each corridor represents a facet of identity that must be explored and understood. Freud emphasizes that the ego is shaped by meaningful experiences and relationships throughout life. When one of these relationships undergoes a drastic change, such as children leaving home, the ego must reorganize itself to maintain cohesion. In this labyrinth, it is common for parents to ask themselves, "Who am I now?" This question reveals the need to redefine one's identity, no longer centered on the active parental role. Freud would suggest that this is an opportunity for the ego to strengthen itself by integrating new experiences and discoveries that had previously lain dormant under the weight of parental responsibilities. During this journey, the unconscious may bring repressed desires and interests to the surface. Freud believed that many of our impulses are repressed to maintain social and familial harmony. As parental demands lessen, these impulses may emerge, offering a chance for self-discovery and personal growth. It is a fitting moment to explore hobbies, passions, and projects that had been set aside. However, this exploration can be accompanied by guilt or fear, especially if parents feel they are abandoning their children by pursuing new achievements. Freud would identify this feeling as a manifestation of the superego, which internalizes social norms and expectations. Recognizing that self-care is not selfish, but a legitimate need, is essential for moving forward through the labyrinth of identity. The exit from this labyrinth is not a return to the starting point, but a progression to a new level of self-understanding. By integrating past experiences with new discoveries, parents can build a richer and more multifaceted identity. Freud viewed this process as a form of individuation, where the individual becomes more aware of their uniqueness and potential. Thus, the labyrinth of identity, far from being a place of loss, becomes a space of rebirth. By facing their fears and insecurities, parents can emerge stronger, more authentic, and better prepared to live a new phase of life with fullness and meaning. The silence that settles over the house after the children leave can be deafening. Each room seems to hold echoes of laughter, arguments, and shared moments. Freud taught us that the physical environment is imbued with psychic meaning. Objects and spaces become symbols of the relationships and experiences lived within them. Thus, the absence of children transforms the home into a space filled with memories and longing. This silence can awaken feelings of loneliness and abandonment. Freud would identify these feelings as manifestations of the original state of helplessness, a condition inherent to human beings from birth. In reliving this state, parents may feel vulnerable and insecure, as if they have lost their place in the world. Recognizing this vulnerability is the first step toward overcoming it. To cope with this emptiness, it is common for parents to seek to fill the silence with activities or distractions. However, Freud would caution that avoiding the confrontation of emotions can lead to repression, resulting in psychic symptoms. Instead, he would suggest the conscious processing of grief, allowing emotions to be felt, understood, and integrated into the new reality. In this process, communication with the children takes on a new form. Interactions become less frequent, but can grow in depth and quality. Freud valued the ability to establish relationships based on empathy and mutual respect, where each individual is recognized in their uniqueness. This new dynamic can strengthen family bonds, even at a distance. Moreover, silence can be an opportunity for introspection and self-discovery. Freud saw silence as a fertile space for the emergence of insights and profound understanding. By allowing themselves moments of quiet, parents can come into contact with aspects of themselves that were previously hidden by the busyness of daily life. Thus, the echo of silence does not need to be feared. It can be embraced as an invitation to reflection, growth, and the construction of a new way of being in the world. By transforming silence into inner music, parents can find harmony and peace in their new reality. Parental love undergoes a metamorphosis as children grow and become independent. Freud described love as a libidinal energy that can be directed toward different objects throughout life. In the beginning, this energy is intensely invested in the children, but over time it must be redirected to allow for the healthy development of both parent and child. This transformation of love requires the renunciation of control and possessiveness. Freud believed that true love involves the ability to let the other person be who they are, without trying to shape them into one's own image. For parents, this means accepting their children's choices, even when they differ from their expectations or values. This renunciation can be painful, as it involves letting go of a part of one's own identity. Freud viewed this pain as a necessary mourning process, where the ego must adapt to a new reality. By allowing themselves to feel this pain, parents can find a new emotional balance and strengthen their capacity to love in a more mature way. The metamorphosis of love also involves redefining boundaries and forms of emotional expression. Freud emphasized the importance of clear and sincere communication in human relationships. Establishing new channels of dialogue with children based on active listening and respect can strengthen bonds and promote a more harmonious coexistence. Furthermore, this transformation offers parents the opportunity to rediscover love for themselves. Freud highlighted the importance of self-love as the foundation for healthy relationships. By taking care of themselves, parents can become models of autonomy and well-being for their children, inspiring them to do the same. Thus, the metamorphosis of love does not represent a loss, but an evolution. By allowing love to transform, parents can experience a deeper, freer, and more enriching form of affection that transcends the limitations of time and circumstance. With the departure of children from home, many parents experience the awakening of a new self, previously dormant under the demands of parenthood. Freud believed that the ego is dynamic and capable of reinventing itself in response to life's changes. This awakening represents an opportunity to reconnect with desires, interests, and aspects of identity that had been set aside. This process can be compared to a journey of individuation, where the individual seeks to integrate different parts of themselves to achieve a greater sense of wholeness. Freud saw this quest as essential for personal development and for attaining a deeper sense of existence. During this journey, it is common for internal conflicts to arise, especially between the desire to explore new possibilities and the fear of the unknown. Freud would identify these conflicts as manifestations of the psychic forces of the id, ego, and superego, each with its own demands and influences. The key lies in finding a balance that allows for personal growth without neglecting acquired responsibilities and values. The awakening of the self also involves reconnecting with creativity and spontaneity. Freud valued the expression, "This entire transition process awakens hidden layers of the psyche which, according to Freud, belong to the vast territory of the unconscious." Upon losing the role of active caregiver, the individual encounters long-repressed desires, fears, and fantasies. The unconscious, like a deep ocean, brings to the surface everything that was buried in order to preserve familial and social balance. Now, without the constant work of parenthood, these forces emerge, demanding recognition and integration. At this stage, many parents are surprised by vivid dreams or intense emotional reactions they don't understand. Freud would call this the return of the repressed, when previously unacceptable psychic contents invade the conscious mind. The trap would be to try to ignore or suppress these signals. The healthiest path, according to psychoanalysis, is to listen to these symbolic messages, interpret them, and allow them to shed light on forgotten aspects of the personality. Freud viewed dreams as the primary pathway to the unconscious. It is possible that mothers or fathers, now with more time, begin to dream frequently of their children's childhood, or of situations symbolizing fear of abandonment, uselessness, or even freedom. These contents should not be feared, but understood as clues on one's inner journey. They show what the soul longs for: recognition, autonomy, pleasure, and meaning. The journey through the unconscious is comparable to an archetypal descent into the underworld. In describing psychic processes, Freud often drew upon classical images from mythology. The parent becomes the hero or heroine who ventures into darkness to emerge transformed. Just as Persephone returns from the underworld to bloom in spring, the adult can emerge from the plunge into their most primal emotions, freer and more authentic. This descent requires courage. There are no shortcuts or quick solutions. Freudian psychoanalysis reminds us that well-processed psychic suffering transforms into creative strength. By accepting the invitation of the unconscious instead of fearing it, the individual can access new sources of vital energy, creativity, and existential meaning. The journey through the unconscious is not a threat, but a promise. It leads to the true encounter with the deep self and invites the individual to live not only as a parent, but as a complete, integrated being, reconciled with all their internal parts. This is perhaps the fullest form of emotional freedom. Upon emerging from the journey through the unconscious, the individual reconnects with the external world from a new perspective. Freud always emphasized that psychic balance does not lie in the denial of inner drives, but in their proper channeling. Parents who manage to traverse the grief of change and the path of self-discovery return to life more aware of their desires, more empathetic, and less dependent on the approval of others. This return marks the beginning of a phase of fulfillment. Relationships with their children become healthier because they are no longer centered on the need for control or the expectation of gratitude. Freud said that mature love is the kind that demands nothing in return, but finds joy in simply existing and being shared. It is in this love, free from possession, that true connection between parents and adult children flourishes. The rediscovery of personal desire leads the individual to pursue achievements that had been postponed, returning to school, engaging in social causes, developing artistic skills, or simply experiencing new adventures. For Freud, the psychic energy, libido, that had previously been invested exclusively in the children is now redistributed, allowing the individual to blossom in new dimensions. This is also a time to redefine social relationships. Many friendships that were once superficial gain depth, while others cease to make sense. Freud saw human beings as creatures of relationships, and when these bonds are consciously chosen and not merely driven by necessity, they become an inexhaustible source of emotional satisfaction. Daily routines also transform. What was once centered around meeting external demands now includes self-care practices, walks, reading, contemplation, meditation. Freud reminded us that pleasure is not found only in major accomplishments, but also in the ability to savor the small joys of everyday life. The return to fulfillment, therefore, is not a return to the starting point, but a reinvention. The individual who goes through this journey becomes stronger, more authentic, and above all, more at peace with themselves. There is no longer a fear of solitude, because solitude is no longer seen as abandonment, but as a choice of freedom and reconnection with one's own being. In the final stage of this process, the person understands the deepest teaching of psychoanalysis. Life consists of constant losses and reunions, and true suffering arises from the attempt to avoid the inevitable. Freud maintained that human beings are driven by the pleasure principle, but maturity requires reconciling that desire with the reality principle. Accepting that the role of father or mother changes is, in essence, the greatest proof of emotional maturity. This acceptance brings an almost philosophical serenity. The individual realizes that love has not diminished, it has simply transformed. The children are still loved, but now in a freer way, less burdened by expectations. Freud would see this as the most beautiful form of sublimation, transforming a once possessive energy into something that enriches both sides of the relationship. With this wisdom, The individual also becomes a silent example for their children, showing in practice that it is possible to live fully even after the great mission of raising them has been fulfilled. The respect that arises from this is deeper and more lasting than any emotional dependence. Freud saw this kind of relationship as the foundation of true family harmony. The wisdom gained also becomes a legacy. Many choose to pass on their experiences to others facing the same challenge, becoming mentors, volunteers, or simply attentive listeners. Freud would say that this transfer of experience is a high form of psychic elaboration, as it allows suffering to be converted into service and care for others. The fear of uselessness disappears. The individual understands that their existence is not defined by a single social role. On the contrary, they discover themselves as a multifaceted being: parent, friend, professional, learner, traveler, thinker. Freud always highlighted the plasticity of the human psyche and its infinite capacity for reinvention. Finally, as this journey draws to a close, the individual recognizes that there is no definitive end, but rather a succession of cycles. And so, with lightness and wisdom, they continue to walk forward. As Freud would say, being completely honest with oneself is a good exercise. And this, perhaps, is the greatest gift of the silent transformation that occurs when the children grow up and you finally learn that there is life, so much life, after they leave. And now, as we reach the end of this journey together, a profound truth reveals itself with an intensity that can no longer be ignored. The role of parent never truly ends, but it transforms. What was once constant presence, daily care, and endless concern now becomes respect, admiration, and freedom. Just as Freud taught us that the human psyche is a living organism in constant adaptation, so too must parental love free itself from its old forms in order to flourish into new possibilities. What seemed like a loss was, in reality, always a silent invitation to personal reinvention. Along this path, we have passed through the pain of symbolic mourning, the dark journey through the unconscious, the rediscovery of forgotten desires, and finally emerged into a new fullness. The silence that once frightened us has become a sacred space for self-knowledge. The absence of the children, once so feared, has revealed itself as the opportunity to reconnect with oneself. The former dependence has dissolved into mutual respect and genuine admiration. Like a phoenix rising from its own ashes, the individual who has accepted the Freudian journey of transformation returns stronger, lighter, and more whole. And now comes the great question. Are you also ready to release the ties of the past and make space for the new self that waits eagerly to emerge? Sigmund Freud affirmed that individual liberty is not a gift, but an achievement. That freedom demands the courage to let go of old roles that no longer serve you, and to embrace with maturity the uncertainty of what comes next. The love that frees is the only love that endures. And this truth, as challenging as it may sound, holds the seed of an unshakable inner peace. Allow yourself to look at your life with new eyes. What do you see today? An emptiness or an open field waiting to be sown with new experiences, relationships, and meanings? Psychoanalysis reminds us that we are infinitely plastic, capable of reinventing ourselves countless times throughout life. It is not about denying the pain, but transforming it into creative impulse. If this video resonated with your heart, it is because your journey also calls for this metamorphosis. And now, with new understanding, you hold the keys to begin this path. I want to leave you with one final reflection, filled with the symbolic intensity Freud so valued. Perhaps the greatest proof of love is to let go of those we love the most, so that both may find themselves again, freer and more authentic. If this message touched you in any way, do not keep it to yourself. Like this video as a gesture of recognition for all you have lived through and all you still can be. Share it with someone who also needs to hear these words. Comment here. What has been the most defining moment of your journey as a parent, caregiver, or guardian? Your story may be the light for another soul in search of meaning. And if you want to keep receiving content like this, which welcomes, challenges, and inspires, subscribe to the channel. Together we form a community unafraid of reinventing itself. Let this not be a farewell, but the beginning of a new chapter in your life. Welcome to the next chapter of your journey.